Hello friends, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Depending on which video you are seeing at the moment, this is video 2 of 2 or 1 of 2. Tonight there were 2 Stamptember limited edition releases, so check out my blog post that I'll have linked below because I'll have links to all the things. This video focuses on the Concord and 9th limited edition exclusive with Simon Says Stamp. This is the 'Tis the Season set. Just fabulous Concord and 9th goodness. So I have distressed watercolor paper, smooth side facing up in my Mini Misty here. I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm inking up the large floral stamp in this set with clear embossing ink. And I'm going to ink it up and stamp it a couple of times because there's a lot of detail in this stamp. So I'm going to stamp it a couple times, and then I'm going to coat it with detail white embossing powder and heat emboss it, which, as always on camera, looks like nothing. I had so many different ideas. I was like, ooh, this would be gorgeous to do like no line coloring. I could just stamp it in black and then watercolor. And then I was thinking like metallic heat embossing, all those things. The sky's the limit with sets like this. You can kind of do whatever you want. So I'm actually going to mix it up and do something a little different in a moment here. So first I heat embossed it in white. And then this is kind of a little extra. This is something I would do though if I was going to mass produce, if I had the time right now, which I don't, to do a bunch of mass producing, is I lined up the heat embossed image in a second Mini Misty just so I could center one of the sentiments from the 'Tis the Season set, because there's that like wood piece in the middle basically of this wreath. So I lined up that sentiment and then I set it aside. I'll get to that in a minute. First I want to do some coloring, of course, and I'm going to use my Distress Oxide inks and do my Out of the Lines Messy Watercolor. I did that on my last video and you guys really enjoyed that. I love doing it. It's another one of those things. I've been just using regular watercolors for so long, and then I pull up my Distress Oxides and start watercoloring with them again. And every time I'm reminded how much I love playing with these inks. So I've smushed just the edges of the ink pads onto my Waffle Flower Water Media Mat. And then I'm just watercoloring everything first with just a really light layer and going right outside the lines. Just using a lot more water than color so I get that paler version. And this time around, honestly, I could have just left it as this. I think it was kind of pale and pastel, and I was really happy with it. But as usual, I couldn't stop here. For me, that's I think one of the most difficult things is to like know when to stop, and also to know when, it's like this looks good. It doesn't need, 15 layers of color. But anyway, I did the first layer. I went outside the lines with all the different colors. And then I started going into the actual parts of the image and just using more ink, less water. So it's a much more concentrated color there, and then just painting it on. And I'm not doing anything fancy, like any sort of special layering or anything, or, areas lighter or darker. I'm literally just filling in like each leaf with a green. And then I'm going to fill in the poinsettias with red and then go from there. So I used 3 different shades of green because there's a fair bit of greenery in this pretty little wreath, and that really just makes it all pop. So I used peeled paint and pine needles and evergreen bough, and I really like those 3 greens together. They're just pretty. And then, of course, for the poinsettias, I was using candied apple, and then I'm going to pull in a little bit of the aged mahogany there that I have smushed. I was using the aged mahogany on little like berry branches in the wreath, but I'm going to mix it with the candied apple as well, just to add just a little bit extra. And then I also have antique linen that I use for the little larger flower clusters that I also mixed a tiny bit of that aged mahogany with. So I just went along and just kind of kept painting and adding. The only thing I really added extra layers to were those poinsettias, just adding that little bit of extra ink just to, deepen them and make them pop a little bit more. And then I did paint the wood area because I wasn't sure if it would show at all. In the end, I could have just completely left that, but it took 2 seconds anyway. But when I adhere the other piece that I do on top of it, it's not going to show at all, so it's irrelevant. But sometimes when you're popping up other layers and that sort of thing, if you can see under it, it helps just to have it colored. But I use the Weathered Wood Distress Oxide ink for that. But again, it took 2 seconds, so I'm not too worried about it. And then I did add a little bit of splatter, just with that candied apple and aged mahogany after it was all dry. And then I went back and now I have just a plain piece of that watercolor paper in the MISTI with just the sentiment. So I used my anti-static powder tool. I stamped just the sentiment with the clear embossing ink, and I'm going to heat emboss this with gold. Now, I could have done this after just doing the white heat embossing, but I wanted to make that little center area stand out a little bit more. So I did the gold heat embossing on this separate piece, and then I'm going to line this back up in the first MISTI because I still had the big image in there. And then I'm just inking up that like wood portion with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. So it'll give it that black outline. And then I'm going to paint this with those same Distress Oxides. So I used weathered wood, and then I actually pulled in a little bit of vintage photo. I was thinking like barnwood, you know? I was like, and as with all wreaths, it's like, oh, how nice would this be to have an actual wreath with like, you know, a Christmas wreath with some barnwood and then a gold metallic, like, yeah. Again, if I had the hours in the day, although I've mentioned this before, I'm not good at like floral arrangements. I've never made a wreath in my life. I'm not even going to go there. Anyway, I can do it with stamps. So after I watercolored it and dried it, I trimmed out just that wood portion with my scissors. And then as a force of habit, I coated the edges that were kind of exposed from cutting with my scissors with my Memento Tuxedo Black marker. Just makes everything look a little more seamless. And then I set those aside for a minute, and I have my card base here, which is Simon's Fog cardstock. And I still have that image lined up in my mini MISTI. So I'm just going to ink it up with that weathered wood Distress Oxide ink and stamp that onto the inside of the card. And then once I have that stamped, I'm going to line up another sentiment from the 'Tis the Season stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that with that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. So then once I've got that stamped, I'm going to remove those from my mini MISTI. I've cleaned off that big floral wreath set, and I am going to line up a Schoolhouse Red envelope, because I thought, again, I've said this a million times in videos, if I don't do the envelope at the same time as the card, I don't always decorate the envelope. Sometimes just adding a pretty envelope to it is fine. But other times, depending on what I'm working with, if I don't do the envelope when I'm making the card, I'm not going to do it later. So pulled out a Schoolhouse Red envelope, and I decided I thought it would be kind of cute. That wreath would look nice, and you could write the address where that little wood opening is. So I kept it subtle. I inked this up with that aged mahogany Distress Oxide ink, which again on camera on the Schoolhouse Red doesn't show up very well. But in real life, it just gives it that extra little something. And it kind of oxidized a bit because parts of the stamp were still a tiny bit wet from when I cleaned it off. So it made the ink oxidize as it dried on the envelope. So it's kind of cool in real life. I'm not going to lie. I really like how that turned out. So did the envelope, set that aside to dry. The sentiment I popped up with a little bit of Simon's Big Mama foam tape. And this is what I mean. Like once this is popped into place, you can't see the other parts. That's why I didn't need to watercolor it, but meh. And then the main panel, I had die cut that, by the way, with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies. And I adhered that with some Big Mama foam tape as well, because it gives that little extra bit of dimension. And then as a final step, of course, I'm going to add some bling. I have some Studio Caudia Poseidon crystals, some Studio Caudia Gold Spark crystals, which are some of my favorite. Those are the clear ones with gold glitter in them. And some Studio Caudia Wineberry pearls. The colors were all just perfect for this. So sprinkled these throughout this little wreath here, and then once I was kind of happy with everything, I'm going to adhere these into place with dabs of Craft Tacky glue and using my Studio Caudia embellishment wand. FYI, every time I use this wand, I do link to it in the supplies. I've had people asking me about this. It's wax, so it picks up all my little embellishments and my crystals and whatnot, but it's not so sticky that it clings to them. I love this embellishment wand. Love it. You guys see me use it in just about every single video. So, and with everything else, I will have links to all of that in the description box below. Again, the set is limited edition, only while supplies last for Stamptember. I'll have links to my blog post, links to the supplies, all that info in the description box below the video. Check that out if you're interested, and check out my other video if you missed it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video, which will be very, very soon. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!